'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where you ought to be. And when you find yourself in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight.
When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed to turn. Turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be true, 'tis the gift to labor till the day is through. And when you find yourself in the place so fine, will be in the cool of the birch and the pine. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed to turn. Turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
Tis the gift to be joyful, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift, 'tis the gift, 'tis the simple gift to be. And when you find yourself filled with pure delight, the gift to be simple has led you aright. When the true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shall.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. I'm Reverend Marcus Leifert. I'm so glad to be with you this bright first Sunday of spring, and I am booming here. All right. Yeah, sunshine and good company. It is good to be together. If you're visiting with us for the first time, I especially want to welcome you. We hope that no matter who you are or how you make your living, no matter whom you love or how you experience the sacred, you will feel welcome among us here in the fullness of your being. Everyone is invited to stick around after the service, to make your way all the way across that atrium into the social hall. Apparently, we've got a new route for you to follow to lunch. So thanks, Karen Tripp, and everybody who helped organize that. We're going to have lunch. We offer lunch freely after every Sunday service. Thanks for our incredible kitchen team who put so much work into making that happen. And yes. And you too could be one of those incredible people. I noticed just today there's a sign-up list out there about joining the cleanup crew, so feel free to pitch in if you can. We gather each week here at the intersection of arts, justice, and spirituality, acknowledging that we gather on the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We hope that we'll do our part to restore this broken covenant that we've inherited, that we'll have the humility and the courage to repair what has been broken and live into a new solidarity with Indigenous peoples and the earth. We have a memory book at the back of the sanctuary. If there's something on your heart any Sunday that you want read aloud during the service, you can write it there, a joy or sorrow, grief or gratitude, and I'll share it in our prayer. You're also always welcome to simply light a candle for a silent memory or prayer. We are in our season of stewardship where we're thinking about the 5 love languages, we're thinking about love in translation, how we create loving community here amongst us, that core part of our mission. And we are so honored this Sunday to have a special guest, Liz James. Liz is the founder of a 270,000 person online Unitarian Universalist community called the Unitarian Universalist Hysterical Society, which you might be familiar with the Historical Society. You might be members of the Hysterical Society. And she also is the host of half of the hosting of the Cracked Cup podcast. And she's working on a book with Skinner House, our Unitarian Universalist publishing press. She also runs Mirth and Dignity, an organization devoted to supporting diverse expressions of Unitarian Universalism. She believes in a Unitarian Universalism that is filled with meaning and joy, that sees change as an adventure. And if you like what you hear her say today in the service, stick around. She's going to offer a workshop. We didn't get this announced ahead of time, but if you want to grab that lunch and bring it into the fireside room and join Liz for a little more time, she's leading a workshop called Steering in a Tornado, a field guide. And in this time of rapid change, of technological growth, how do we hold it with humor and flexibility? So please, plan to join Liz for that. There's going to be story and a chance to share and enjoy time together along with Liz. So welcome once more. If you'd be willing to rise in body or in spirit. And before we sing our first hymn, we're just going to turn to the back camera there and wave to those of us joining on YouTube or Facebook. We're so glad that you are with us. We feel you here among us. And turn and greet your neighbor. Just wish them a happy Sunday.
Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this Sunday. I am delighted to be here. I'd like to invite Sandy and Suzette to come up to light the chalice. The chalice words are by Dan Savage today, but I'd like to tell a little story before we light it. So in my travels doing UU humor, there's a conversation that I keep having over and over again, where someone will sidle up to me. It's a long story. Someone will sidle up to me, and will say, it's important to laugh. And I will say, uh-huh. And they will say, this is usually at coffee hour, especially with all the going on, it's important to laugh. And I will say, yeah, especially with all the going on. And this whole conversation is had in the hushed tone of voice that I think maybe people reserve for the buying and selling of drugs, like it's sneaky. And we as UUs are earnest people, and there is a lot going on to care about very much. And this morning's service is not going to focus on those things. It's going to focus on laughter. And I want you to know I mean no disrespect by that. I do think these things are serious, but I also think, especially when things are serious, it's important to take a break to laugh. And so, with that in mind, words of Dan Savage. During the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. The dance kept us in the fight, because it was the dance we were fighting for. It didn't look like we were going to win then, and then we won. It doesn't feel like we're going to win now, but we could. Keep fighting, keep dancing, and I would add, keep laughing.
It's crowded in the kitchen. Everyone's trying to speak. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a belief. There's an elephant in every room. No one's taken out the trash. There's 1,000,000 miles that come between the front door and the back. If the world was a house and it was on fire, would we just put it out or let it burn higher? We wouldn't be strangers. We wouldn't be enemies. We'd run into danger. I'd save you, you'd save me, if the world was a house. Secrets in the basement, closets full of rage. This house is leaning right and left. It's never stood up straight. On the porch they're praying to Jesus. Upstairs they read the stars, looking for a hammer, looking for a nail to keep from falling apart.
If the world was a house and it was on fire, would we just put it out or let it burn higher? We wouldn't be strangers, we wouldn't be enemies, we'd run into danger. I'd save you, you'd save me. We wouldn't be strangers, we wouldn't be enemies, we'd run into danger. I'd save you, you'd save me, if the world was a house.
That was beautiful. I would say I'd like to invite the children to come forward for the children's story, but you guys are a step ahead of me. Well, I'm going to move down to where I can see the pictures, because they're an important part of the story. Our story this morning is After the Fall by Dan Santat. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot high up on the wall, which, when you think about it, is a weird place for an egg to be. But I loved being close to the birds. And then one day I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, but that was a little bit of a grand name. It was just an accident. But it changed my life. And now we have a brief tech pause, because the second part, no, this isn't on purpose tech pause, actually. The second part is a video, and so we have to switch over to the video part. There are a number of tricky transitions in the PowerPoint, so we've made it to a video so that the PowerPoint person doesn't have to follow along with my timing perfectly. So. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together. Well, most of me. There were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things, like sugary cereal. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. Oh, I missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it, because I knew accidents can happen. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. And then one day, an idea flew by. Making paper planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches, but day after day I kept trying and trying until I got it just right. My plane was perfect. It flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt so happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. If you can't see, his paper plane is stuck up high on that wall. I almost walked away again. But then I thought about all the time I spent working on my plane and all the other things I missed, and I decided I was going to climb that wall. The higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it, but I was terrified. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing, one step at a time, until I was no longer afraid. And so maybe now you won't think of me as the egg who was famous for falling. You can see him starting to hatch if you're close enough to see the pictures. Hopefully you will remember me as the egg who got back up and discovered that he could fly. I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and we will sing the children out.
Good morning. So we are Suzette Dugan Anderson, and I'm Sandy Portillo Robbins. We were asked by the Stewardship Committee to speak about the love language of quality time. When I think of quality time, I don't think of time not wasted, but rather spending time meaningfully. To me, that means the time has been enriching, be it intellectually, physically, or spiritually. You know, those times when we laugh with family or friends so much that you cry, or sometimes we have serious, deep conversations. It doesn't even have to involve talking. Sometimes sitting in silence together is deep. Sometimes it can be time to reflect on our own, or doing something you love to do, alone or with others. For me, all that happens here at UUCB, at Sunday service, and with other groups that I participate in. I have made so many meaningful connections here, and coming here every Sunday, I know my time will not be just time well spent, but kind of timeless. When we make our pledge every year, I know that it can never be enough for the many blessings I receive here. Quality time is priceless. Last spring, Suzette and I were lucky to be leading a chalice circle, and I think chalice circles embody the meaning of quality time. Where else are you able to set aside time to just listen to each other and to be listened to? And I mean deep listening. We also laughed together and got to know each other better, so that when we see each other here at church, it just makes for a deeper connection.
When I think of UUCB in the framework of the love language of quality time, the metaphor that comes to mind is that of a cocoon. From the outside, the cocoon is deceptively still and not terribly interesting. From the outside, UUCB is a church. For some of us, this particular C word carries a complicated emotional history, but that is what we are, a place where people come together to embrace spirituality and to worship. Inside the cocoon, there's a whole life force happening of joys and sorrows, challenges and celebrations. The gift of the cocoon, and by extension UUCB, is that it blocks the intrusion of the outside world so that the inside world has the time and space to unfold. Whether you're visiting UUCB for the first time or have been coming for years, you feel the wild energy of this place and an invitation to step into the thing that calls you. And because whatever it is that calls you will embrace and also challenge you to evolve into something beyond who you are right at this moment. This is a place where you can be vulnerable. This is a place where you can be emotionally held during difficult times. But this is also the place where you can sing and dance and gossip, and just have plain old fun. We really are each other's people. Sometimes I'm besides myself with excitement at the prospect of coming to church and being with all of you who I admire and have come to love. And sometimes I feel just meh. And even in those meh days, sometimes I'm always feeling better leaving than when I started. The gift of UUCB is this cocoon of quality time. When we step inside the walls or step together in real time or virtually, the outside world stops. And while inside this cocoon, we get to work on our becoming, individually and as a community, in a space that is not always easy, but is wildly committed to affirming our humanity as individuals and as stewards of each other's well-being. I'll close with the words slightly modified from one of my favorite poems, because I think it illustrates the gift of us together. You give me what you do not have, and I give you what I have to give. Together, we make something greater from the difference. Thank you.
Technical issues, even in a prayer. Just take that deeper breath. Just settle more deeply into your place. Feel this earth beneath you, holding us no matter what. Our new home is blanketed in front and behind by fields of oxalis. I remember when I liked to chew on the sour stems as my child does now. Wood sorrel, bane of every gardener's existence. My wife makes clear it is an enemy as she gathers its seed pods from the earth by the handful. I like to think of it as God's highlighter, a bright and cheery yellow emblazoned across the earth this time of year. An eye-catching herald of spring. I shrug my shoulders to my neighbor. We'll just work at clearing it away for a few years, I guess, I say. Decades, she replies. Now, as I fill up our green bin each week, removing it by the shovelful without making hardly a perceptible difference. I am thinking of the men who are hell-bent on an indiscriminate uprooting. How I too have known the siren's call of efficiency, the seductive, sped-up life that keeps me from communing with the purple lupins and the orange poppies emerging on the hillside as our patch of earth tilts sunward and our days outlengthen our nights once again. God that resides in the invasive sorrel just as in the native poppy. Love that holds us when our days and nights are balanced and when they are anything but. Remind us that in times filled with deception, we can still nurture truth. That in times fueled by hate, we will plant love. That in times of isolation, we have community. That in times of immature leadership, we have committed to growing together. And that in times of great heaviness, laughter can lighten our load. As they harry us with the urgency of their headlines, as they come to uproot the freedom of speech and rip away the soil of our common good, let us refuse to pay homage to their false idol of efficiency, to swear allegiance to a false flag of greed and indifference. In this time, let us rest into the deeper rhythms of sun and sky and soil, knowing they have outlasted every crazed attempt to dominate the earth. Let us rest in inefficiency, in stillness, in quiet, together. In this community of care and witness, we hold one another through the seasons of our lives and lift up those joys and sorrows among us. Someone shares with joy that my dear friend Lindsay is still with us and her dear self after a year in hospice. Beth Jurdy wishes happy birthday, Hazel Gonick. A thank you to Ms. Luchard for her leadership and direction for Berkeley High School's Hadestown. And thank you to Chris Prattley for visiting us today. Christine and Linda Hayden and their son-in-law John Nance remember our parents Harlan and Joanne Hayden, who were longtime members of this congregation from 1960 to 2024. We miss them. Arlo asks for energies to assist in the healing of myself and my parents, Reed and Alvin, for healing. With Laura, we celebrate the birth of grandchild Gray Clifton Sander, and blessing healing to Christopher Renley. And an invitation. We have super cards to share and celebrate and care for those in our community. Please sign them whether you know someone personally. Our names make love visible. For these that we have lifted up aloud and all that yet remains in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, may each of us know that what we hold here or wherever you are joining us from is held in the loving embrace of this community and by that love beyond all naming, the love that cannot and will not let us go. May it be so, and amen. Let's remain seated as we sing together. Loosen, loosen.
Let's take a deep breath together. About the time I was beginning seminary, my congregation moved into a new building. I was on the board at the time, and I was one of those people who had their nose in everything all the time. And so I was involved somehow in renovating the space to make it suitable for Unitarian Universalists. First and foremost, that meant removing the giant cross from the front of the room. Now, if you're new, I need to clarify, UUs don't have a problem with crosses. We aren't vampires. There's lots of people who are both UU and Christian, but there's also humanist UUs and agnostics and Buddhists and pagans. It takes all types. So a giant cross at the front of the room was a little more of lifting than one perspective than we were looking for. So the theology we worked out very quickly, but in practical terms, it turns out wood is quite heavy. The phrase cross to bear, it's not just a theological statement. Even getting this thing off the wall was a feat of engineering and a near-death experience, and now what? This giant cross wouldn't exactly fit as it was into the back of my minivan. It was going to need to be sawed into pieces. You can't use the power saw in the building because sawdust flies everywhere, and there's an informal rule about no more power saws in the sanctuary, which was on the verge of becoming a formal rule. So this was the line of thinking that led me to a conversation with my friend Anne, who is a woman of great maturity and perspective. This is a sensitive time for your neighbors, Anne explained. With the loss of the old church that shrank down until they couldn't afford their building, your new neighbors will be grieving. But there's also potential for new connection, for inviting people in. And Liz, the community's introduction to Unitarian Universalism cannot be you sawing apart a cross on the front lawn of the old church. I'm not sure how the cross was taken away in the end. For some reason, they didn't involve me any further, but the job got done. But here's the thing. The cross had hung there for many years, beside the huge vaulted windows through which light streamed down. And it's true what they say. Light really does transform everything it touches, particularly on a timescale of years. And so now, the paint around the cross had grown distinctly lighter, but the paint behind the cross had not so much. And so now, immediately behind the pulpit was a clearly stenciled outline. We could have solved this by repainting, of course, but in order to do that, we would have had to agree on paint colors. And the decorating committee pointed out that the colors couldn't be chosen until the fabric for the new chairs, which would replace the pews, was chosen. And the worship committee felt that the pews couldn't be removed until we talked about how we embody our identity and our relationship to authority in the structure of our worship space, and you get where this is going. For many months, we did not worship beside a giant cross. Instead, we worshipped beside a very conspicuous shadow cast by its absence, a giant metaphorical Jesus was here sign stenciled above our heads. This happened in more ways than one, actually. It was on the literal wall, of course, but also in the conspicuous role that the Protestant tradition we come from plays in everything we do. It's in the tunes of the songs we sing. It's in the fact that we meet on a Sunday morning, often in a building owned for that purpose. We've expanded our theology, but the ways we embody that theology have not changed very much for several centuries. And so to me, the shadow of the cross on the wall on Sunday morning was a physical manifestation of a structure that was frozen in time. It said, we've decided to do things differently, but we aren't quite doing things differently because the details are still stuck in committee. At around this time of the shadow of the cross business, I was also feeling kind of personally stuck in committee. I was deeply in love with Unitarian Universalism and its values, and I was expressing that love by going to seminary, where we talked about this shadow of the cross stuff. We wouldn't have used that language, but we talked about the rapid pace of change in society. We talked about modern needs and how we could keep pace with them. But we had those conversations in a university, mirroring the old ways of doing things with every detail of our structure, with all the expense that goes with academia, and the inertia and the gatekeeping. And so by approaching the issue from just that one perspective, we were taking down the cross, but continuing to function within the confines of its shape. Now, I sucked at all of it. Even when I am not critiquing the very premise of school, I am a terrible student. Forcing my brain to study has always felt like trying to wrestle an angry toddler into a car seat. I had long since received an ADD diagnosis, which is the medical term for that whole toddler car seat situation. I had received medication and behavior suggestions, and of course, all the messages that go with all of that. At the time, I saw myself as disordered and the wrong shape for academia. But I loved Unitarian Universalism, and I wanted to serve it. And this was how you did it. So I was determined to squeeze into the shape that was being asked of me. Sometimes, like on my good days, I was determined. On my less disciplined days, I would skip the books and sermons we were supposed to be reading, and I'd do what I'd love to do, which is laugh. And so one day, I was procrastinating on homework, watching these comedians on YouTube, and I thought, wait a second. They're talking about the exact same ideas as the people in the books I'm supposed to be reading. They're talking about big topics, often really tricky ones. Stand-up comedians, they'll tackle anything: religion, race, money, ethics. But they do it in a way that's funny and accessible and easy to pay attention to. And this was the beginning of a doorway in me Maybe the fact that I had trouble paying attention to academia wasn't only the flaw that would make me a crappy minister, although I believe I would have been a crappy minister had I gone that route. But maybe also those traits were the same things that would allow me to talk about big topics in the same ones ministers do, but in a way that's easier to pay attention to, a way that makes room for people like me. And so the farther I moved from the powerless position of a grade school child, the more assertive this line of thinking became. I would sit in my school lecture and the usual messages would run through my head. The problem is that I need to be better at paying attention. But now there was this little voice that argued back, that argued, how come it's always that I have to work harder to pay attention? I have been working as hard as I can for years. How come my professors never have to work any harder at being easier to pay attention to, huh? Now, when it wasn't dry, the stuff I was learning was also, it was not what I had expected. I had had these stories of our UU history in our head, like the story of Michael Servetus, the Unitarian martyr, chased and persecuted and ultimately burned at the stake for his brave act of speaking the truth to John Calvin. So it turns out, if you read Servetus' writing in his own words, well, he's really smart, he's very articulate, he's definitely brave. He's also really obnoxious. He doesn't just tell his truth, he stalks John Calvin. He writes him letters arguing every little point. He distributes books about him. At one point, Calvin has a warrant out for Servetus' arrest, and Servetus goes to one of Calvin's talks and sits in the front row. He was always there, like the worst internet troll, but in real life. Servetus didn't deserve what happened to him, of course. Nobody deserves that. But after reading his actual words, dripping with arrogance and condescension, there was like this little part of me that sympathized with Calvin's perspective. I know that guy, that Servetus guy. I've chaired meetings containing that guy. Sometimes I have been that guy in the meeting. He is the best of us in some ways and the worst of us in others. Or Emerson and Thoreau, that was another one. I had always admired the Transcendentalists, how they forged these intentional, beautiful lives full of integrity. Learning a little bit more about it, Thoreau could retreat to the woods to suck the marrow out of life because he was living on land Emerson gave him for free. Where'd that land come from, Thoreau? And the story about how you're making this bold choice to live a simple life in the woods? I think we can fairly say Thoreau didn't invent that idea. Before Thoreau's people arrived, in fact, simple was pretty much the only way anyone ever lived in those woods. So there was this whole system supporting Thoreau. He had no kids to take care of, he had his free land, and we're pretty sure that Emerson's wife was doing his laundry that whole time. Louisa May Alcott, meanwhile, is living a few miles away, making all the same theological points about simplicity and intentionality and virtue in what became her best-selling novels, Little Women. But she wrote in a way that wasn't academic. As her dad sat in the study talking philosophy with Thoreau and Emerson, he didn't work for much of her life, Louisa got to work writing. In a world not built for women to have a voice, she found a way to have one. In a world not built for women to earn, she found a way to feed her family with that voice, and she did all of that while she was doing her own laundry. I'm sure you can hear my frustration. I was not the only one who felt this way. We malcontents found each other and we bonded, and then we used our pent-up irritation and our knowledge to play very witty and historically specific pranks on one another. One time, some of our friends who ran a UU housing cooperative in Boston posted online that they were accepting applications for new roommates. A few of us applied, as variously mostly dead Unitarians and Universalists. We applied as Emerson, listing Thoreau under pets. We applied as Michael Servetus, and under food allergies, we wrote barbecue. I'm not endorsing it, I'm just telling you what happened. We also applied as the people we thought were missing from our mainstream history, too. Reverend Olympia Brown, the first woman in the US to be ordained. Dorothy Dix, whose tireless lobbying transformed conditions for institutionalized people in the United States, Canada, and several other countries. These women's names are not our best-known heroes, but when you line their lives up against Thoreau in the woods or Servetus with his letters, you can see their stories deserve just as much acknowledgement. So the housing co-op wrote back and invited us for an interview, which was going to be tricky as we were dead. The housing co-op also cautioned us in their letter that some housemates may not have experience in living with the dead and may require education on matters of corporeal privilege. All of this was followed by a week of messaging and coordinating and giggling and pranking, which left me feeling warm and connected. Connected with my peers and with my UU heritage, gently poking fun at things I thought should be knocked down a peg or two, lifting up stories that aren't always told. And the prank connected me with my values, too, as we coordinated to know just how far we could push things, keeping it funny for everybody involved. Above all, the prank left me feeling a part of Unitarian Universalism. You understand shared jokes because they arise out of shared stories. I mean, corporeal privilege? How UU is that? This was a space that had room for me, where I didn't have to change shape to fit into a prescribed shadow. And I didn't want it to end. So on a whim, I created a Facebook group and I named it the UU Hysterical Society. It's a play on the UU Historical Society, who have changed their name twice since then, so nobody ever gets my joke. People usually just point out that the word hysterical has a troublesome history, used as a weapon to discredit and sometimes harm women, which it does. Throughout history, symptoms of hysteria have been varied. Sometimes it was a woman who was struggling with what we would now call a mental illness or disability. Sometimes it was a physical condition like epilepsy, or a life choice like deciding not to get married. Often it was a woman who was just unwilling or unable to toe the line in some way. Hysteria was a catch-all word for any woman who was being inconvenient and needed to be treated. A hysterical woman was a woman who was the wrong shape. And I, who was struggling to fit into the shadow of the cross, I loved my UU Hysterical Society. It was an expression of my values. It was a space that fit me. It was a break from the ministerial formation process at a time when that process was starting to break me. For years, I didn't think of it as anything more than my own personal refuge. By the time I clued in that something was going on, we had about 20,000 members. Someone posted that she nearly drove her car off the road after spotting a UU church. She said she thought we were a joke religion made up for the purposes of the UU Hysterical Society, and that seeing a real UU church was like spotting a unicorn. She almost drove her car off the road yelling, "They're real! They're real!" And I thought, wow, we could be telling 20,000 people about what Unitarian Universalism is. And then I thought, oh no, we could be telling 20,000 people about what Unitarian Universalism is. I am not the right person to represent UUism on that kind of scale. I didn't finish the assigned reading. Fortunately, I didn't have to be the right person for the job. A religious educator named Kathy Smith joined the team at about that time, and she filled in some of my gaps. And together, we stewarded the group as it continued to grow. And I toyed with the idea, maybe we should become, something more? Maybe a legal entity so we could apply for grants to fund all this extra work Kathy was putting in? But even thinking along those lines felt presumptive, who did I think we were? That wasn't a rhetorical question. I had no idea who we were or what we were doing. And then, in November of 2019, something happened that changed my perspective on the group forever. My friend Reverend Mabutsan Dajijimana approached me for help raising money to settle a group of UU refugees. In November of 2019, the Hysterical Society held its first charity fundraiser. It was holiday-themed, refugees, that goes with the Christmas story. We sold funny PDFs, like labels for wine that said, "Hey, this was water a minute ago." Or tags that said, "It's the thought that counts, and I really overthought this gift." We sold flasks that said, "For when thoughts and prayers are not enough." And this is my spiritual practice. We raised more than $16,000, and on one of my trips to the post office, arms full of flasks, the guy finally says, "Okay, I'll bite. What is a hysterical society?" And I didn't respond how I usually did when asked what I do for a living. Normally, I mumble, "I run a Facebook group that makes fun of my religion." This is not an accurate answer, but it usually ends the conversation. Instead, I lifted up my head and I grinned. And I answered with confidence, and I said, we're a group that is about joy and community and refugees. We had started gathering around laughter, which is a good in and of itself. It's like a soup kitchen for the soul. But we were slowly turning into more than that. We were still about laughter and community, but also about bringing dignity to people who deserved a chance to build a life. The Canadian not-for-profit Mirth and Dignity was incorporated the following month. To this day, 100% of the profit from our merchandise goes to the charity that Mabutsa founded. But most of what we do is we support forms of UUism that are not supported by traditional institutions. We started with the Hysterical Society, then a board game ministry, a project on TikTok, comedy podcast, most recently online soulful singing. I could go on. This is not an infomercial. You do not need this much detail. Unless you share our vision of UUism beyond traditional structures, in which case, come talk to me about becoming one of the people who supports us with a $5 a month pledge. Okay, now I am done. For now, what I want to draw your attention to is the overarching arc of this story, that feeling of not quite fitting, which is, I find, a feeling that a lot of UUs can empathize with. Many of us became UU because we didn't fit into the communities that we were born into, and we figured out how to be diverse theologically, and I believe we are also right now in the process of creating a structural diversity, a bunch of different ways to be UU. We have together inherited a shadow of a cross, a set of institutions and practices that define real religion that don't completely work for modern communities. I've heard from people who feel like they're tired, like they're trying to do too much, like they're focused on the wrong things. In our churches and in larger society, we are working ourselves into exhaustion, and it's not quite doing the trick anymore. Maybe we don't need to work harder. Maybe we've already been working as hard as we can for years. What if this pressure doesn't mean what we think it does? What if we're not cracking because we're breaking, but because we are turning into something different? What if we lean in to changing shape? After all, when the cracks first appear, you can't know at that time what they mean. I have no idea where that would lead, any more than I had any idea where the prank in 2015 would lead. I just knew I needed to hold on to something that would keep me going, that would keep my spirits up. I do know, though, that the first step now is to give ourselves permission to be who we are, not who we think we're supposed to be, not who we have always been. What would we do differently if we saw ourselves as hatching? As the Leonard Cohen lyric tells us so beautifully, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There are cracks in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I think that's true, but it's not quite the whole picture. The cracks are how the light gets in, yes. Sometimes the cracks are also how the light gets out. The cracks are where the hatching starts.
Birds they sang at the break of day. Start again, I heard them say. Don't dwell on what has passed away or what is yet to be. The wars, they will be fought again. The holy dove, she will be caught again. Bought, sold, and bought again. The dove is never free. Ring the bells, it still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. We ask for signs, the signs were set. Birth betrayed, the marriage spent, the widowhood of every government. Signs for all to see. I can run no more with that lawless crowd, while the killers in high places say their prayers out loud. Well, they've summoned up a thundercloud. They're gonna hear from me. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. You can add up the parts, but you won't have the sum. You can strike up the march, but there is no drum. Every heart to love will come, but like a refugee. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in.
Hi, I'm Pierce Sunho. I'm a member of your Board of Trustees. In our covenantal community, we share the responsibility of pursuing our mission by giving generously of our time, talent, and treasure. I invite you to support the work of our church by giving electronically, by scanning the QR code on the back of your badge, or by putting cash or check donation into the donation envelope that you'll find at the back of the pew in front of you, and then putting it into the donation box beside the fountain and the atrium as you leave. Each week, half of our offering is shared with a nonprofit Good Neighbor organization. The Good Neighbor organization this month is the Emeryville Citizens Assistance Program, which provides food, care, and compassion for those in need. I think, yes, there. The Emeryville Citizens, Emeryville Citizens Assistance Program. Okay. Will you join me in rededicating ourselves to our mission? We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service.
Hola, buenas tardes. Me llamo Charis Tomador. My name is Charis Tomador, and I'm your Connections Coordinator. If you're new to our church and you'd like to learn more about how to get connected, you can find me or any of the greeters at the welcome table after the service. To find out what's happening in the life of our community, you can always check the news link on the homepage of our website, where you'll find the week ahead including a list of activities, announcements, and contact information. This week, I want to especially lift up the following. This afternoon at 5 p.m., we invite anyone in the LGBTQIA+ community to Coming Out Stories, a space for deep listening. Bring snacks to share. We are thrilled to announce this year's Lawrence Lecture titled Emergence, the Futures We Can't Yet Imagine, with keynote speaker Dr. Ruha Benjamin on April 18 and 19. This conference seeks to answer the question, how do we nurture spiritual exploration and activation in the face of catastrophe? More info on our website. And on May 2nd and 3rd, you're invited to a leadership retreat. If you're involved in any capacity within our congregation and wish to deepen that relationship, we encourage you to join us. Again, more information is on our website. Now please rise and body your spirit to join us in singing our closing song.
Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, we gotta go. Oh Lord, we gotta do. When the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you gotta laugh. Oh Lord, you gotta laugh. When the Spirit says laugh. 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 You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance, oh Lord. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 Spirit says when the Spirit says shout. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. You gotta Spirit says shout. You gotta shout, oh Lord. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. 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 Spirit says Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do, oh Lord. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says do.
Reach out a hand or touch a shoulder or reach out to that great beyond. Let us be connected. In times of hate, love is resistance. In times of fear, courage is resistance. In times of poor leadership, community is resistance. In heavy times, laughter is resistance. In these times, our joy is resistance. May it be so, and amen.